Earthworm Jim is a run-and-gun action platformer released for the Sega Genesis in 1994. It was met with critical acclaim, receiving Electronic Gaming Monthly's Genesis Game of the Year award. Earthworm Jim just oozes style. The game opens with you having to drop a refrigerator onto a board to launch a cow into space, and the game pretty much maintains that level of weirdness throughout the entire adventure. The game has a level of juvenile crudeness that reminds me of the Ren and Stimpy show, and I can't help but think that was a likely inspiration. The gameplay is a mix of run and gun and platforming. Earthworm Jim can use his worm body as a whip for short-range attacks, and also has a gun for long-range attacks. The gun doesn't have unlimited ammo, but will slowly refill to 100 if you aren't using it. Sadly, you can't shoot while jumping, which is a bummer. The levels themselves are incredibly varied. The opening level is a junkyard filled with tires to bounce off of and junkyard dogs to destroy. The following level is What the Heck, which is clearly hell. It also appears this is where lawyers go, as they are a prominent enemy in this level. The color palette used here is a stark contrast to the junkyard level, and it almost feels like an entirely different game. This trend of puns, jokes, immaturity, and wildly different level concepts continues through the game. The level design doesn't really match the creativity found in the graphics and art. If you strip away all the humor, you're left with a generic platformer with some flaws. There are giant pits everywhere, and missing a jump can often mean repeating a giant section of the game all over. It's frustrating for sure. In addition to this, there are level hazards. Because the art style is so whimsical, it's not always clear what is going to harm you until it's too late. I don't mind trial and error gameplay, but at times it just feels like the entire level is out to get you, and it's downright cheap. Earthworm Jim's controls lean more on the spastic side and could definitely be a little tighter. The bosses are frequent and a mixed bag, ranging from somewhat fun to incredibly frustrating. It isn't always obvious what you are supposed to do to defeat them, and even when it is obvious, it can be tough to execute. Where Earthworm Jim really shines is in the graphics department. The game is at times breathtaking. The underwater segments in particular are incredibly impressive. While there are no real transparency effects here, the glass on the tubes still somehow feel transparent and reflective. On top of that, everything is moving up and down with the waves, and it's really fantastic. The backgrounds in most of the levels are also impressive, featuring large, detailed landscapes, rather than the same repeating sprites. The animation is all fast and fluid. Every last enemy and boss looks very cartoonish and seem to feature far more detail than the low resolution would allow. Earthworm Jim features a good soundtrack as well. The tracks fit the overall theme of the game with high energy and plenty of bass. I wouldn't call any of it memorable, but there is some serious quality here. The sound effects are all appropriate and there are some nice voice samples. Despite all the humor and the graphical pizzazz, I really don't enjoy this game. I've been trying to like it for the past decade, so it isn't for lack of trying. The game just seems to focus so much on style that important things weren't given the level of care they deserved. Playing it today, I think Earthworm Jim is a bit overrated. The level design just isn't up to the level of AAA platformers of the time. The controls are too loose and it's difficult to keep up with the frantic pace of nearly everything happening in the game. In 1994, many of the game's shortcomings could be forgiven because of the awesome presentation and the overwhelming sense of originality. I'm not saying this is a bad game, perhaps it just hasn't aged as well as other platformers from this era. With that said, I still feel Earthworm Jim is worth a play for any retro gamer. It's a visual and audio triumph for the Sega Genesis, and is one of those games that helped pave the way for the gaming industry to go truly mainstream. 3 out of 5.